This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is April 10th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lonnebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. I'm recovering from a cold, so hopefully I can get through this. On today's show, we have financial reports, which means numbers and really fun stuff to talk about on a podcast for BC. It is interesting, I swear. We won't get into the local government stuff. I'll talk about with Matthew on the next Canby report when we get around to that. We also, in the federal election, have foreign interference allegations and lots of policy. So we'll try and get through this in an efficient manner. Patreon.com/Politicoast. As I said, the annual reports for the political parties came out from Elections BC today. These are my favorite numbers of the year because it's the nerdiest thing. You get to see the income statements, the balance sheets, all the contributors they had through the year, and you get a real sense of like how healthy the two political parties are. Right off the top, you can see the NDP raised $8 million and the Conservatives $6.6 million. And considering they didn't really exist for the first quarter,
that's so impressive.
Yeah. And even more impressive once you start digging in and looking at the...
Yeah, how did that compare to the 2023 BC United haul?
Did they have money in 2023?
Yeah, they really started... Kevin Falcon actually fit some of their fundraising woes. But
BC United raised 2.9, roughly 3 million in 2023 to the NDP's 4.5.
Okay, so like some of this is a election year high, but that also does really indicate just how much more effective the Conservatives were.
Yeah, in 2023, the Conservatives had raised 443,000, so they were already starting to build a respectable base. And you'll notice we won't talk about the Greens because, once again, the Greens have not filed by the deadline and are going to take the late fee. Notably as well, BC United just didn't even ask for an extension. They just haven't filed anything.
Really feels like they're just cruising to just get delisted due to not bothering anymore.
I think they face penalties, though, as well. Although, at some point, I don't know who's paying those. It's funny, because in the last thing I saw, Kevin Falcon said by message or one of their agents that they're sticking around to try to pay off their debts, but it feels like you have to file your reports to pay off your debts, at least, too.
Well, also, who's going to give money to a party that didn't run any candidates and has no future?
The income of both of these parties is a little bit more interesting as well. The Conservatives basically got all their money from individual donors because they didn't get many votes in 2020, so they didn't get a particularly large annual allowance. Their total was $65,000 for the year versus the NDP's $1.6 million. That's going to go down for the NDP because they got fewer votes, and it's going to go way up for the Conservatives. There's a bunch of other lines of income for the NDP. The most notable was the $226,000 they got in investment income. Just a banger year on whatever they had.
Yeah, which is super weird because you don't think of political parties as organizations that hold investments.
Well, the NDP holds $491,000 in investments, or at least did at the year's end, which is pretty good.
Yeah, but also weird.
I mean, if they have so much cash that they've been raising, it makes sense for them to put it in a midterm investment vehicle and earn some better interest. And things went well for them last year. On the other side, the expenses for the parties were pretty big in both cases last year. The NDP had $18 million in expenses, the Conservatives $12 million. There's just a lot more standing costs for a large party that has an office and long-term staff versus the upstart who doesn't have any assets besides cash. So the NDP came out with a $7.8 million deficit and the Conservatives a $5.4 million deficit. On the balance sheet, it's very interesting. I mentioned the Conservatives have the assets of the $33,000 they have in cash. The NDP has $1 million in cash and $6 million in total assets. A lot of that being like buildings and things that aren't easy to liquidate. Nevertheless, the NDP have $4.4 million in accumulated surplus once you take off their loans and outstanding liabilities, and the Conservatives have a $5 million loan, so they're $4.5 million in debt, which will be easier to pay off with their additional $1 million roughly of per vote subsidy.
Yeah, plus the fundraising that'll come in over the next couple of years.
It does show the NDP is still in a better fiscal situation overall, which isn't too surprising.
Governing parties always almost are.
And especially coming after several years in government versus a party that just started up and doesn't own anything. I think the most surprising numbers in here are the number of contributors, which the Conservatives had more on both scales, both the donors under $250 and the donors over $250.
Yeah, which really kind of goes to show the grassroots strength of the party.
Yeah, the NDP had about 26,000 donors in total, about 2/3 of those under 250,000. The Conservatives had 32,000 donors, 2/3 of those in a similar split, 20,000 under 250 small donors. So that's a lot of momentum for them.
Yeah, and one of the things that really hobbled BC United, beyond the terrible leadership, lackluster branding, no ideas, but beyond that is they took a long time to get their fundraising up and running. The previous leader, Andrew Wilkinson, basically did nothing to retool the party to deal with the new fundraising rules that came in 2017. Falcon, was showing some progress, starting to get that up, but they were pretty reliant on tapping people who were giving the mats, and this just shows a much more healthier fundraising base that has room to grow and has room to support the party in the intervening non-election years.
Yeah, in 2023, BC United had 10,000 donors. I mean, BC NDP had far fewer donors in that year too, but the NDP was running ahead on all counts. And here, like, the Conservatives had more smaller donors and their donations were smaller. As they start to milk that and grow it, both get your existing donors donating more and still have that many, it creates a real challenge for the NDP. And, like, realistically, the best chance the NDP had at defeating the Conservatives would have been like 3 months ago, or even now. Not that I'm saying they should bring the government down in a snap election. I don't think anyone wants that, but like mathematically, the Conservatives have a massive debt, and the election periods do have spending limits.
Although it becomes a real hard sell to the population to call it another snap election when you have a majority government. Like, a lot of the time, it doesn't end up blowing back. There might be a week of awkward questions at the start and then kind of becomes inconsequential. But, every now and then a snap election backfires, and that's exactly the situation where they can.
Backfired in 1975 when Dave Barrett tried it. Although, at that point, it sounded like it wasn't going to go better if he waited longer.
Yeah, Ontario's run into that too. Was it Theresa May tried to call the snap election and end up losing seats? Like, it definitely happens.
So, overall, no surprise on the financial health of the NDP. Big surprise on that size of the donor base. Like, the NDP's really got to find a way to reconnect with its grassroots and build that up. Like, these are probably, I'd have to go back and see how they did in 2020. But these are healthy numbers for the party. It's just they haven't had a real challenge in quite a while. And like, you have to remember, there's like 5 million people in BC now. And even if there's 3 million adults, 2 million people who could be donating to parties, like, we're talking about under 100,000 people have donated to a political party in BC. Like, there's a lot of people who could be convinced to join your movement. inspire them. That's my message. Well, we're sticking in BC before we turn to the federal election. The legislature has had a few stories this week. They have launched their special committee on democratic and electoral reform. This was part of the agreement that they signed with the Greens to have some kind of parliamentary committee. This one is going to look at democratic engagement and voter participation and models for electing members of the Legislative Assembly, including proportional representation, is in the terms of reference. We have the committee membership also announced. It's chaired by MLA Jesse Sunner. Rob Botterill is there from the Greens. And honestly, I don't know half these names well enough to tell you offhand who's from the Conservatives and who's from the NDP. But it'll be interesting to see how this committee goes. They're able to meet through the summer with their goal of reporting back by this fall. So that'll be the thing I'll watch this summer, is how does the committee start to recommend we reform, and do they actually try to go for another proportional representation move?
I kind of hope not. I like proportional representation more than first past the post, but we've had 3 referendums in the last 20 years. We kind of have the answer on that. At some point, you just kind of need to accept the finality of those, at least for a generation or so, not, keep repeatedly going back to the same thing for another kick at the can again and again and again.
Yeah. Or maybe they come up with calling a citizens' assembly and just adopting what they do and putting it to a referendum after, or who knows. But I don't know. This was a way to satisfy the Greens. Curious what the Conservatives will come out with in this. They're a little bit more of a wild card. I imagine they generally prefer the status quo, but they might surprise us. Their whole party is a wild card. We got another statement from the Premier today as well on dealing with the tariffs. And part of the trade war approach EB has taken is he now has a directive to all ministries, health authorities, and core crown corporations to critically review all contracts with the US and decrease the province's dependence on goods and services. Basically, cancel American contracts, quote, wherever viable.
I could swear this had already been announced.
Yeah, I think they'd vaguely said it, but now it's a specific directive. And it's pretty much like cut the US out of everything unless it's absolutely essential. So no non-essential travel, cancel all subscriptions to US publications and software that isn't absolutely necessary.
They're canceling the program to send cancer patients to Washington.
Yep. Which was never a great program. I get the necessity, but it was embarrassing to need that. So I'm curious to see how this reverberates through the government, but it is a more detailed order than I was expecting. And it kind of surprised me. It's like you, I thought, hadn't we done this already? But there you go. And the other good announcement today, there's a lot of announcements today, is that the province has finally stepped in and provided $312 million in funding to TransLink to cover the next 3 years, helping solve TransLink, who has been crying that they're about to go under if no one bails them out. And they got their bailout, as was kind of expected.
Cool. Good. TransLink's going to keep functioning?
Yeah, and there's a bit in here to help them continue to expand bus service and to meet some of the goals they're hoping for. There's going to be some minor fee increases, some fare increases. It's going to be $1.50 more to take the SkyTrain from the airport soon, which will be the first increase in a long time ever.
Yeah, but travelers coming in from the airport are pretty price insensitive for that stuff. So yeah, makes a fair percent. Would be good if there was a commuter card for that zone, though.
Wasn't it that the case before that if you had a pass, it didn't count, or if you used a Compass card?
I can't remember. It's been so long since I've taken the train to the airport there.
I have, but it's just I tap in and out, so I don't even see the cost anymore.
Yeah.
I think, like, for me, the airport, it would make more sense if we could recoup the parking charges to pay for transit there and kind of discourage driving and
Well, the
encourage
airport
more.
parking's not cheap there.
Yeah, so what's an extra $2 per car? Versus we want people taking the SkyTrain there.
Well, I think what part of it is that the YVR Airport Authority does not nest under the same government level as TransLink does.
So that's all fine. Hopefully we find a plan that's more than 3 years, so we don't have to keep doing this. It's kind of like union negotiations at this point. But let's jump to the federal scene. And before we get into the absurd amount of policy that was dropped this week without the platforms landing, a couple election interference stories. Right off the top, on Monday, the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force site had its weekly briefing. And this time they actually had something interesting to say. They said there have been efforts through WeChat, the Chinese language social media thing, to influence opinion around Mark Carney. The Globe suggests off the top that it was largely positive, but in one of the statements they say the content has been amplified in a coordinated and inauthentic way. The information operation has contrasting positive and negative narratives, first amplifying Mr. Carney's stance with the United States and then targeting his experience and credentials. So it's just a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you can contrast that to the CBC headline, which was just Carney targeted on there, which you would never know from that there was positive stuff being said to try and pump him up.
Yeah. It's, I mean, not a
incredibly
surprising story.
Yeah, it's still bad that's happening. It's good to at least have this stuff out in public so people can, take the information accordingly, but it's would be nice if more could be done beyond just a, hey, this is happening.
I don't know, maybe we could regulate social media in some way. Beyond that, the Globe had a couple other stories around China. In one story on the candidate that is replacing Paul Chiang, they mentioned a number of that new candidate's connections to pro-Beijing groups, some of which I found rather tenuous. For example, he spoke at a consulate a decade ago when he got a promotion as a cop, because naturally the Liberals chose another prominent Chinese Canadian cop from the area.
Deputy or assistant commissioner. So like senior person, not a huge shot they'd get invited to diplomatic events. But there are also some more substantive, such as being an honorary director for an organization with ties to the United Front Work Department, basically the foreign influence organization for the PRC on that. And that's more substantive. For
his part, the candidate, whose name has escaped me, has said he hasn't been involved in them or connected with them for over a decade, when they probably said, hey, you're prominent, do you want to be an honorary director? And he said, sure, you seem fine.
Yeah, more interesting.
It was a very different situation a decade ago.
Yeah, although that was still currently listed as of this year on their website. But I don't know. For me, it was more interesting that kind of what came out of this. The original Globe story had basically a single small paragraph that noted that Mark Carney had met with the group. Earlier today, another Globe reporter had asked him, can you comment on me and this? And, are there any concerns about the candidate's closeness to pro-Beijing groups? And Carney had a rather bizarre response, which was, don't believe everything you read in the Globe, which is very Trumpy, just as a very matter of tone. That too. And from there, basically said, nope, never met with them, never heard of them, which the Globe pretty quickly posted receipts on that one with we actually have documentation of Carney's meeting with them. We wouldn't have run it otherwise.
I mean, the documentation was on the Ginseng Commerce Council of Canada's website, where they had a picture and they said they had a very in-depth conversation, to which he went, or at least his team went, no, they kind of just passed each other and got a picture.
There's going to be a little more of that, but like either way, the like immediate going to just never met with them seems weird. And it's one of those things that there's been a couple times where Carney's been asked a tough question and he just says, no, that's not what happened. And it turns out it is what happened. Was he the chair of Brookfield when Brookfield made the decision to move the company headquarters to New York? Same thing. Got asked about it, straight up said he wasn't it, and then pretty quickly after, reporters, what your signature is on the bottom of the company statement discussing this. So I don't know, it's a weird thing that's happened a few times during the campaign and the lead up to it, which I don't know if this is just like bad instincts, defensive, it's the political inexperience shown, but like there's a pattern and a real like political weakness here that's starting to emerge.
The Brookfield story is a real one. That's definitely, I get. I agree he should not be attacking the Globe. That's not a smooth thing for any political leader to do. That's not, even if you're mad at them because you think they're running garbage stories that don't have any substance, because I'm reading through this one about him in this picture, and it's like, all they really have is a photo on the website.
There's also a statement they put out
on their website. A lot of groups love to brag about meeting important people, and it's like, okay. And given that this comes after like 4 other stories the Globe has run on Paul Chiang and Yuan, this new candidate, I get he would be grumpy. That's not an excuse for being an ass, as, prime minister and leader of leading party. But I also I don't fully get what, Bob Fife and Steve Chase are doing with these in terms of being prominent journalists, because it all feels rather flimsy and
I mean, it's no different than the
work.
net story we're going to talk about, where, reporters are digging into connections between organizations and individuals who are friendly with foreign governments and what events and political donations they attend and make respectively in the country. It's basically the same beat, just different party, different government.
Although in this case, it's not clear that China likes Carney explicitly.
I mean, we just had a thing about how they're
sending mixed messages on Carney, some positive, some negative. They're just flooding the zone with chaos.
But yeah, the other thing this also reminds me of that I blanked on for a moment, the Rosie Barton exchange about his divestments and blind trusts. Same thing, the immediate response was to kind of lash out at the journalist rather than just have a simple answer to the question.
Yeah, I'm curious how he's going to do in the debate. We'll have to see.
Yeah, so far they've done a decent job of doing the tone contrast with Poilievre, who's has not landed the tone thing all that well. But, the more of these come out, the harder it's going to be to have that differentiation.
Yeah. So the next story you teased up is a global news story from Stuart Bell, who digs into Pierre Poilievre's support from various well-connected Indian Canadians, most of whom are, connected to Narendra Modi, the president of India. So
Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister of India. So it talks about Poilievre being at the home of Aditya Tawatia, who was a major donor to his leadership bid and to the Conservative Party of Canada, and Tawatia had also supported the Canadian organization to help elect Modi in India. And it goes through a few other connections like that. It's an interesting piece. I don't have a ton to say on it. I think we've seen a couple other stories about just like the connections of international conservative movements. And so I think this isn't surprising. It does also follow the stories we've seen talk about India's efforts to meddle in the conservative leadership race in support of Polyev, which isn't to say he was witting or aware of it.
Yeah, like
nothing has shown that.
Nothing in here speaks to anything improper by the conservatives in this. It's more just hey, here's a list of people who donated, who have ties, and Pierre Polyev showed up to a bunch of events that these people were also at.
Would be nice to have some statements from Pierre Polyev on what he thinks about the situation in India and its allegations of interfering beyond just the, denials. Yeah, it's clear that, Modi definitely has a preferred candidate. It's the guy who's in the same, like, international conservative leagues. Let's talk policy, because we have so much in here. We could probably talk for 2 hours, but let's keep it to 20 or 30 minutes. Liberals, fund CBC. Basically do the mandate review they promised before election. I think we talked about it then. But the substantive thing Carney has said is give $150 million increased and then have that be a statutory funding that can't be taken away by cabinet.
The $150 million is significantly less than that mandate called for, because if I'm remembering right, basically had it bring us up to the level of like Germany and Britain and whatnot.
Yeah,
and that's more than like a 10% increase, like this would
be. His policy does talk about getting to the average of other national broadcasters. So I think it's more like don't throw a giant pot of money at an institution that will take a while to change, I suspect. So I think it's not just inflationary increases he would plan. It's more like send it $150 million this year. And then once they've shown that they can start to get better, they'll get the rest of the pot they need. I think it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. There's not like anything new or surprising for the Liberals in there. The strength in local news, more local bureaus is good.
Yeah. On apprenticeships, the Liberals announced that they have a number of different ways to help improve skilled training. $8,000 apprenticeship grants, funding for colleges and training, expanding the labor mobility tax deduction. Again, seems like reasonable stuff.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives had a thing the other week about doing a version of that mobility tax deduction thing too. I think they gussied it up a bit.
Theirs was easier to read.
Yeah, and they made it like sexier by talking about how they were going to take away tax credits for private jets or something, and plow those monies into this.
But sure, very similar stuff.
Yeah.
On seniors, the Liberals have announced that they have two 1-year programs they're going to do. They're going to reduce the minimum amount you have to withdraw from your RRIF by 25%.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, basically your RSP...
Those who aren't retired.
Or, enjoy learning about personal finance stuff and plan for this stuff several decades out. But yeah, when you hit, I think it's the year you turn 71. Don't quote me on this. Shortly at early 70s, I think it's 71. Basically, you have to convert the RSP into a account that you're now drawing down from to pay out. This is where you basically pay the taxes on all the deferred salary and whatnot. And it's set up so that every year you have to withdraw a certain amount based on how old you were when you started it and a couple other factors. It can be like 4% of the account, I think, is not uncommon on that. And I don't know if you were paying attention to the stock market in the last few days, but it's really gotten hammered this week and in the last month. And as a result, if you force people to sell a bunch of their assets in order to do these mandatory withdrawals, it's going to negatively impact the underlying position of it. And granted, it's not, a huge percentage of it, but it does help, preserve how much retirement savings they do have if they are able to delay it.
The other thing he wants to do for seniors is increase the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the funds for low-income seniors, by 5% for 1 year I don't
understand. Yeah. This is at least
It's-
better than some of the stuff the Liberals were talking about before of just, we're just going to throw a bunch of money at like OAS, which is not really measurably income tested below like.
That was what the Bloc wanted. I don't remember the.
There are several Liberal leadership candidates and that we're talking about. It's definitely an idea floating out in Liberal circles on that. But yeah, the GIS, that's like targeted for low income seniors. Makes a lot more sense than, hey, we're going to give a handout to, seniors making $90,000 a year.
I just don't get why you do it for 1 year and then take that money away.
Yeah, well, I think a certain amount of this is basically like the economy's in pretty bad shape. Costs are going to go up with all the tariffs and everything. So
costs notably go down after things settle down, right?
If the tariffs
Like
go away
some-
and a competitive market would drive those back down somewhat.
Sure.
If it's the case that the costs are being passed on, when they get taken away, decent amount of that will also get passed on.
Next, the Liberals have a policy out for nature, biodiversity, and water. If you like parks, the Liberals like you too. They want to make 10 new national parks or marine conservation areas, 15 new urban parks. They'll make national parks and historic sites free again this summer. Again, time limiting things. And they'll introduce an Arctic Indigenous Guardians program and a few other things, but like fine stuff. At some point, you have diminishing returns. Like there's only so much land we can reasonably call a national park.
Yeah, although particularly the non-urban ones, there's still a lot of space to work with.
Yeah, and I guess you can always find like some of the good provincial parks and just say, hey, we'll make them national parks now, and provinces will probably happily turn over that.
I mean,
maybe depends on the park
and the province.
Yeah. The Liberals also want to make Canada the world's leading energy superpower. This is a little bit more substantive. It has investments in critical minerals, fast-tracking projects of national interest, and much more.
Yeah, so a couple things jump out at here. One is basically a single approval process, one project, one review, they're calling it here, which, makes a lot of sense. The Conservatives put out the same policy, I think, a day or two earlier this week, which I'm sure we'll get to. The BC government's moving towards something similar too. Just, if you want to get stuff done, you can't be just layering up with like every single office in the government has to sign off and then like review the other people's stuff and whatnot. So single point of approval, huge amount of sense, great. But it's going to be interesting to see on there like where the compromises that will need to be made are going to come from for actually getting there on this. They're talking about kickstarting like a critical mineral supply chain, but the Ring of Fire, like the big source of important minerals that's been discovered in the past couple decades. We're like 15 years since they started working on developing that, and that doesn't even have a road built. It's still stuck in permitting on all of that. You're going to have to change up the process a lot more than just going down to a single contact point in the government for that if you actually want to get stuff going. And I'm not seeing where those compromises are going to be made. Like, what are they willing to cut out of the process in order to get critical minerals out of the ground and into things we need?
To be fair, none of the parties are willing to say that. They're kind of just all, we'll do it faster. Okay, well, there's lots in the way. All of it's there for some reason, and taking some of those away will upset someone.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can't be like everything bageling every single thing.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm saying you will have to upset someone. Who are you going to upset? Just tell us.
Yeah, I want to know
that. They also talk about East-West electricity grid, which I think has been talked about before. And I noticed the line that they want to invest in Canada's conventional and clean energy potential, which suggests excited willingness to go with oil and gas as well as the clean energy. But they use the word conventional to kind of hide that in there from the more environmentalists among their base. But I think they've already talked about pipelines too, so that shouldn't be a surprise. Finally, for the Liberals, crime policy. They need to fight crime, protect Canada, and build safer communities. Scott, they're going to do gun buyback, but this time it'll work.
Sure. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Because this is a government that announced a gun buyback program in 2020. It is now a quarter of the way through 2025, and not a single gun has been bought back on it. It just keeps tossing more money. Timelines keep getting pushed out, and nothing happens on that at all, except for more than $65 million have been spent to not buy any guns back. At this point, like, why should we believe them that they're going to make this work?
If we believe that one of the big impediments in the last caucus, in the last cabinet, in the last government was Justin Trudeau himself and his personal style of governing, and that involvement created barriers and issues, then maybe just having a new guy on top with a slightly different cabinet is all it will take. I mean, there's lots going on, so maybe he'll be distracted and the ministry can finally just do the job they need to do.
I don't know, like the chief of staff to the prime minister is Marco Mendocino, who was public safety minister during part of this program. Like, these are not changing out the people in any, like, real serious way, except for the top person. And, you know, I'm not sure Carney is like a gun buyback expert or he's going to get this going. Or if he is, he's going to be the guy that like gets in the weeds and has to do everything, which was part of the problem with Trudeau, is that everything had to go through the center, and like 6 people in PMO were trying to run a country of 40 million people, and it wasn't working.
Unfortunately, the candidates who promised to decentralize the PMO did not win the Liberal leadership race. And we got nothing on that kind of stuff from Carney either way.
Yeah, but let's talk about the even sillier stuff in here.
It's just all kinds of stuff. He doesn't like guns, so we're going to revoke gun licenses from violent offenders. And
which, if you were reading this, you would think that this was something that was not already done. But like, it is already the law and the system that if you're convicted of a violent offense, you get your gun license revoked. The federal system, I believe it's every 24 hours, runs a record check on everyone with a possession acquisition license, the gun license, against police and court records on this stuff. There is already a process there. But I don't know, for some reason, they seem to think if they just change the tense, nobody's going to notice that they're not announcing anything new here.
Yeah, the Toronto Sun points out that in 1985, Section 109 of the Criminal Code was introduced that creates a mandatory prohibition order for anyone convicted of a violent offense from possessing weapons.
Yeah, that actually predates the current licensing regime, which was brought in by the Liberals in the 90s.
I don't know.
It's silly. Same thing with the
It's not the only party who's promising to do things that already happen.
Yeah, well, and similarly with the Nets point of legislative requirement that for the RCMP to classify new firearms models entering the market instead of the gun industry is just complete nonsense. The gun industry doesn't get to decide whether or not a firearm is a restricted, prohibited, or non-restricted gun, and that's based on what's written in the law, based on a bunch of technical characteristics and a bunch of orders in council that have, played around with it and added stuff to the lists here and there that wouldn't necessarily fall into certain categories based on, a purely technical decision on this. But it is like basically misinformation to say that the gun industry gets to decide what each new model of firearm is classified in Canada as.
Beyond that, they have some smaller things about the RCMP. The things that stood out for me, though, is hiring 1,000 new RCMP personnel to tackle drug and human trafficking, foreign interference, cybercrime, and organized criminal gangs that steal cars, including a new RCMP academy in Regina and better pay for recruits. as well as 1,000 new CBSA officers to crack down on drugs, including fentanyl and its precursors, illegal guns, and stop gangs from stealing cars and smuggling them out of the country. So just like 2,000 more cops, some at the border, some... Although the RCMP personnel isn't all necessarily...
Yeah, and these are also like,
frontline.
particularly with the RCMP one, it sounds like a bunch of specialized units are getting increased resources, which, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Particularly as these sorts of cases do get more complicated, you do need more specialized units and resources in order to properly go through those cases. And
that's where the
them.
extra funding for the prosecution service is also useful there. They're also going to toughen bail laws, which is kind of the thing everyone keeps talking about.
Yeah, I mean, a little shameless that they didn't mention that it was their government that loosened them in the first place, but, you know.
Loosened
better
to
fit than ever.
The charter.
Well, they could have also, appealed that, used a few different options. Like, they did not have to go with the exact method they went with on that, which has caused a bunch of problems.
They're also going to introduce a few new crimes. They're going to make hate-motivated murder, including femicide, a constructive first degree, and they're going to bring in some crimes around hate in communities, including making a criminal offense to intentionally or willfully obstruct access to a place of worship, school, community center, and a criminal offense to willfully intimidate or threaten those attending services at those locations. Some of that actually is in the code as well. I already know, because there's some weird codes that I've found in the past on obstructing a clergyman is a criminal offense. And I think that got broadened when it got reviewed and they went, why is this still in there? But now they're looking to make it more of just like, you can't protest a church or school or community center, which, has
well, I'm going to guess the thinking
around
was
freedom
less
of assembly and protest, but
I'm going to guess it was less church and more probably mosques and synagogues they were thinking of when they were drafting that.
Yeah, for sure. I'll watch them with my civil libertarian eye as they come out. But on the other side of the aisle, the conservatives have a bunch of policies as well, and let's start with their crime policy by contrast. The big announcement they had this week on that front was the 3 strikes and you're outlaw, because we're digging up stuff from 15 years ago in the States. When did they have the first 3 strikes laws? Quite a while ago.
I think it was 90s or 80s or 90s.
Yeah. Anyway, they didn't work there, but we'll try them now. The basic idea being, if you are charged with a serious criminal offense for the 3rd time, you get an automatic 10-year minimum sentence, dangerous offender designation, which basically results in you not being able to get bail unless you have spotless behavior and clean drug tests and a plan to get your life together.
I'm pretty sure it'd be convicted, not charged.
Yes, that's what I meant.
That's a pretty important distinction on that one.
Good catch.
Yeah. In this case, they're identifying a very real problem. In here, they cite a few examples, and these are only just, a few of the ones that have been reported in the past several years of people with staggering numbers of prior convictions continuing to cause harm in the community. And that's a very real problem. And at some point, it makes a lot of sense to shift less on we'll try and rehabilitate the guy that's resisted the past 59 times of rehabilitation, and more keep that person out of the community where they can't do harm.
I haven't looked too closely, but I have heard the argument that this is pretty unconstitutional in Canada because you can't use people's past convictions that they've done the time for to judge their current behavior.
Well, I don't think you can use that when finding guilt. That's definitely not the case. But if it was to get introduced during the determination of guilt phase in a trial, that would definitely be ruled out of order and struck from the record, and the jury would be instructed to disregard that. But it's entirely reasonable to take into account whether or not someone has committed 59, to take an example, cases of, assault, robbery, threats, and has steadfastly refused to turn their life around at that point. It would, in fact, just be insane not to take that into account when deciding sentencing.
In any case,
the
he's
3
big on
strikes
removing
seems
judicial discretion.
Yeah, and I think there's some argument to tighten the limits on that to a degree. 3 seems like needlessly tight on it, but maybe 10 on that. Like, we should definitely give people a real shot at turning their life around, at learning from their mistakes, being productive members of society. Just, we don't necessarily have to extend that into the high double digits and into the triple digits. Like, at some point that stops making sense. So don't love the 3 strikes, but I feel like there's a spot where we could land at that is somewhere between the current system and this proposal.
The other things Poilievre has talked about in terms of crime changes this week, he would repeal Bills C-75 and C-5, the specific ones relating to crime, if you remember them, which was the changes to bail and the end of mandatory jail time for serious gun/drug crimes.
I really wish we could come up with a better naming system than Bill C whatever that gets reset every parliament.
Most of these bills have plain language names, although some of them are just like amendments to the criminal code.
Yeah. Like, I don't love the thing the US does where they'll create this like insanely long thing to like make into an acronym for like political impact.
The Patriot Act.
The Patriot Act being the most famous example of that. But I kind of feel like there should be a happy medium between the 25th Bill C-75 and that.
The Harper government did have vanity names quite often.
Yeah, and like I didn't hate that. It would just make tracking this stuff easier. But so as for the actual piece,
things he would bring in addition to repealing those, is new assault for intimate partner crime, and mandatory minimums all over the place. Life for 5+ counts of trafficking, importing or exporting 10+ illegal firearms, or trafficking, producing, exporting 40 milligrams of fentanyl, which is quite a bit from what I just looked up at how much it takes to kill you, what a typical dose is. But life in prison for trafficking drugs seems nonsense to me. I get it's a bad thing to do, but I don't know about 25 years or life. Anyway.
Yeah, like the basic idea of being able to put some like parameters on where the range of sentences are is pretty reasonable on that. Don't love some of these ones because they seem to be kind of picked out of thin air. It's not entirely clear where they're landing on some of these ones for it, but yeah, as a basic, like, yeah, this crime's serious enough, it should carry a sentence of at least this seriousness is pretty reasonable.
5 years for gang-affiliated extortion, 4 years for extortion with a firearm, 3 for other extortions. And then the most vaguely worded one is a mandatory minimum of 6 months to 3 years for your third offense of motor vehicle theft, which we checked. And 6 months is the current mandatory minimum for your third motor vehicle theft.
Yeah, it's...
So it's weird. Unclear if he wants to raise that to 3 years, or if it's a mandatory minimum that has a range. In which case...
is also how the law is currently written.
Yeah. Anyway, dear policy analysts, read the law before proposing to change the law.
Yeah, just for all the parties.
The Conservatives did a bunch of else this week that we'll just fire through. On housing. They re-announced...
We also missed the remove house arrest for conviction of motor vehicle theft, which I really wish there was a little more in here on like where that's coming from, because I'm sure that has to be a case of judges handing out one or more sentences of house arrest for that crime. But I don't know, feels like there's a missed opportunity to tell the story here. It just kind of lands a little out of left field.
They did link to past statements they've done on car crime, but yeah. So the Conservatives did re-announce a bunch of their housing plans as they stand, and they announced one new kind of interesting thing. They said for every dollar of relief a municipality offers in development charges, the Conservatives will reimburse 50% up to a maximum of $50,000 per unit. So basically, directly telling municipalities, cut your development cost charges, and we'll pay for at least half of that.
Yeah, I mean,
which means they have to make up the rest, but it's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start, and it's kind of ridiculous how much municipalities are just trying to squeeze out of new housing on this. A couple stats they cite is that, in the past decade, Toronto has increased their fees from $30,000 to $140,000. And Canada-wide, there's an average of $27,000 increase on housing just over the last 2 years. Like, all of this ends up just going into making housing more expensive. If you were to break it out proportionally, this would probably be one of like the highest taxed goods in the country. It probably beats alcohol and cigarettes as a percentage, or close to it. But unlike those, having homes is good for society.
I still think the land value is the biggest cost. Like the additional costs of the fees and stuff, but like the unit cost of alcohol is pretty cheap, but we don't need to do this. All the parties are basically in on finding ways to cut development charges. Let's just say that. And this is a novel one.
Which is good. And they do also highlight the Liberals have, despite their housing accelerator fund and all their housing stuff, have not really forced municipalities to do it. This wasn't in their press release, but a little while ago, Mike Moffat had a good thread where he basically looked at, I think it was City of Ottawa and a few others that basically took the Liberal money that was conditioned on not raising the fees, and then they turned around and raised the fees, and the Liberals basically did nothing about it. Oh, no, actually, never mind. I do see they mention Ottawa and Victoria as example of that. But yeah, it's clearly a case where like municipalities have been bad actors, and the Liberals have not been willing to hold them to account for that.
Cool. Conservatives, they want to crack down on tax cheats with a bring it home task force. And then this entire policy reads like it could have come from the NDP, closing loopholes for offshore tax havens, redirecting CRA resources to tackle offshore tax havens, and a name and shame website for corporations that dodge taxes. Cool.
Feels very NDP, that last one.
Love it. But the NDP didn't do it because they're not cool this year. Like the Conservatives, weird. Fine, well, offshore tax havens are big issues.
So lackluster as a campaign.
Yeah, the NDP, I'll just mention, has a housing announcement that we probably won't have time now. And they did have something on offshore tax havens, but it's like the boring part of this, of just like closing loopholes and doing a task force as well. The Conservatives will also do the one-stop shop resource project with the goal of 1 year waits for approvals with a target of 6 months. Sure, we already talked about the value of getting projects done. They also want to do the standard kind of conservative thing of cutting red tape by having a new law that is for every 2 regulations that are repealed. That they have to repeal 2 regulations for every 1 that is imposed, and for every $1 of new administrative costs, $2 has to be cut elsewhere. And then they blame the Liberals for, even though there is a 1 reg in, 1 reg out policy law in place, that they're just stuffing all their regulations into like omnibus regulations now. It's like, well, of course they are. That's what you're going to do too. Because it's hard to not do it.
Yeah, there's a thing called Goodhart's Law, which basically says once a measurement becomes the goal, it ceases to become a good measurement. And yeah, that's a perfect example of it. Another one was that I think it was the CRA, but one of the public-facing things had a metric they were trying to hit on wait times for calls, and basically just game the system by hanging up if it took a certain amount of time to get to someone on there. I don't know if you remember the Wells Fargo scandal a couple years back where a bunch of people were working there were just opening accounts for customers that they had not agreed to at all. But like that was also a case of this where basically they were being evaluated on how many new products that they opened for customers. Yeah, you got to be careful on this stuff, and this is a little bit of a harsh or brute force approach that needs a little more finesse.
And their last policy of the week was to create 50,000 treatment beds for addiction recovery and to ban the drug dens within 500 meters of schools, parks, playgrounds, daycares, seniors' homes.
Yeah, that
and
last
not allow
one.
any new one.
Yeah, that last one they'd announced a while back, pre-campaign.
Yeah, it's getting hard to keep track of what's new and what's not. A lot of it all sounds the same. Like I said, the NDP tax dodgers and close tax havens. They want to give every Canadian a family doctor by 2030 by just hiring a lot. Similarly, they'll also promise to do pharmacare in 4 years to cover it all.
I mean,
it's stuff I would expect.
Yeah, like this is the stuff the NDP has run on for the last several elections. On there, some of the Jack Layton elections kind of were focused a little more like narrow pocketbook stuff than this, but this is like the same thing the NDP has been banging the drum on for decades now, and gets them 20% of the vote if they're lucky. But like, I think at this point, it's practically the white noise of politics. There's like so little new here or exciting.
I mean, universal pharmacare and getting everyone a family doctor are good things, but let's get there. Their housing plan is 3 million homes by 2030 by basically doing the Housing Accelerator Fund and the Housing Infrastructure Fund, or whatever it's called, but renamed to the Canadian Homes Transfer and the Communities First Fund, given $8 billion over 4 years for each of those to basically carrot provinces and municipalities into adopting all of the regulatory changes the NDP wants, which is mostly the stuff the Liberals have been doing: freezing development cost charges, ending exclusionary zoning, upzoning, all of that, but also national rent control.
Yeah,
and
which
stop
would
rent evictions.
Yeah, which would just come out the worst. Particularly, okay, so they have ban rent evictions and dem evictions, and that last one in particular is really stupid if you're trying to build a lot more homes, because you will, in fact, unless you're planning on just sprawling out everywhere, in fact, need to tear down old buildings in order to build newer ones that have more homes in them. And if you just prevent anyone who owns property from terminating the lease in order to do that, or terminating the rental agreement in order for them to do that, you basically just gum up the entire development works. And it'd be one thing if they said like bad faith renovations or something, but just the no dem evictions ever anywhere in the country is a way to not build any homes while seeming like you're doing something virtuous.
I'd be curious to see the like they don't have a detailed enough backgrounder to know exactly what they mean, but I'm curious if a thing like the Burnaby or the Broadway plan's tenant relocation policy would be sufficient to say they're not being dem evicted, as in kicked out of their home with nowhere to live. It's like if you've been guaranteed the funding and the right to return to a new home, it doesn't count, kind of thing. I could see that getting, that's not a real dem eviction, that's a, the tenant has been protected. Maybe. But it's fine. I mean, people, we have rent control in BC already, and so I think the concerns are overblown.
Well, I mean, that's because like BC goes, and a lot of the provinces basically put a bunch of stuff in place to mitigate the worst aspects of it, such as the rents being able to reset when the units lease is terminated and a new tenant comes in, if you were to do the one that I'm sure the NDP would want to do, because it's the thing that progressives are always talking about, of having just you can never change it.
If they were going to do vacancy control, they would have said vacancy control, Scott.
Vacancy control is one of those things that gets talked about in housing circles in Vancouver, but if you're putting together a national campaign, you probably just mean that you'd probably just going to use the term rent control as the catch-all for all of it.
I don't know. I'm not going to read in anything beyond
that's
just
also a form of rent control. You shouldn't necessarily take the BC specific terminology and extrapolate that out.
I mean, it's a BC NDP government right now that's introduced it and has held on to it. So I would see them adopting it.
But this is a federal NDP platform in a federal election.
Anyway, at least they are focused on a lot of trying to improve density and build homes. I'm still surprised they don't have a public sector builder like the Liberals announced. I don't know what they're doing. Hey, and the Greens released some policies this week on healthcare and foreign policy. Kind of what you would expect. They like both, provided we are friendly. I don't know, we don't have time to get into it.
Yeah, so the Greens are even more relevant than the NDP, particularly this election, so yeah, none of this stuff's going to make it into actual public policy. But yeah, we'll throw the link in the show notes if you're curious.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.